Hi everyone, Mike Wolf here, and welcome to another edition of Entrepreneurs Making a Difference, where we connect entrepreneurs from all over the globe so they can collaborate and do amazing things together. So today I've got a good friend of mine from Atlanta, Georgia, named Ron Reardon, and he basically runs a company, actually a nonprofit called Fully Invested Dads. It advises first-time fathers on their role in the positive emotional development of their child and how they can create the foundation for their child to be happy, fulfilled, and productive. So welcome to the show, Ron.
Hey, Mike, it's good to be here.
Great to have you here. Good to
Yeah.
see you again. So tell me a little bit, how did you get started on Fully Invested Dads? What inspired it?
Well, you want to have the real story?
Yeah, absolutely. We're authentic here and transparent. So
Well, it's almost like Twilight Zone material because I worked at AT&T for 32 years, and then retired from there, and then I had my own business for about 10 years, and the joy was just gone. It really wasn't my passion. Plus I went to Mel's event and realized that what I had basically was a job. I was chief cook and bottle washer. I built a business that didn't have systems of scale or anything like that. So it's like, in the country where I grew up, it says, that dog won't hunt. So I realized that I need to do something else, but I didn't know what it was that I was going to do. But a good friend of mine that I think you know, Joan Rosenberg,
I
uh,
do, absolutely.
called me up at a meeting that we were at and said, are you doing anything for supper tonight? And I said no. She says, well, I got somebody I want to introduce you to. So I go down there and she introduces me to Pam, and Pam tells me her story. And Pam's got a unique gift where she can actually see into the spirit world. Okay, and so Joan asked Pam to tell me what she was seeing. And she says, well, I see an angel behind Ron. He's got his hands on his shoulders. And I'm just like, I'm really tempted to kind of turn and look to see because I don't feel anything. And she tells me the angel's name. And she basically says that the angel had a message for me that whatever it was I was about to do, that the angel would have my back. Okay, well, it's nice to have support in that arena. And then Joan said, well, tell Ron, what else that you see? She says, well, I see that, Ron's going to be working, with parents and with children. And I had gone through different things that I could do. Okay, I said, well, I know that my story is important and, that it's going to involve speaking and like that, but I'd never, ever, Mike, considered that I'd be working with parents and children. And so my mind's just kind of spinning, mainly because of the angel thing. And Joan even asked me, he says, Ron, are you okay? And I'm like, well, I've got to really process this because, I was kind of dizzy. And so I started thinking about that. I says, well, I had good success with my twin boys, and I raised them basically 180 degrees different than the way I was raised, and it turned out to be okay. And they had kind of continued what I had done, with their children and done even better. But I still wasn't that convinced. So I went to another event with Roberto Candelera, and they asked me to come up on stage and kind of tell people what I was doing. And all I did, Mike, was I simply said the name of the company. I said, Fully Invested Dads. I just said those words. And I could visibly see, almost like a force field, going through the audience. I mean, people were backing up. Women started crying. And I'm just like, wow, what's going on here? And the thought that went in my mind is like, it looks like I'm stuck. I've got to do this, okay?
Mhm.
But so I started doing research on the topic and everything to see if what I did really kind of blended in with what the science said. And then I was at Starbucks, and I decided that I would start journaling because I'd heard from Brendan and a lot of other people, you need to journal. And I said, okay, I've put this off. I think I'll do it. And I'd heard on an audio tape a lady talk about her daily journal, and what she did is she would write down a question to God, and then would sit there and wait for an answer, and then record the answer. And I thought to myself, well, I've had direct experience with asking a question and getting an immediate answer, but it was a long time ago. And it was basically the night before I was going to marry what became the mother of my children. And I was wondering if I should really get married. And So I'm out in the country. It's one of those starlit nights, where you could see the Milky Way. Okay, that's how far in the country I was. And I'm walking back and forth. Is this the right thing to do? Is this the right person? I've known this person since I was 5 years old. And so finally, I just look up in the heavens, into the sky, and I say, I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not. Could you give me a sign? And as soon as the word sign left my lips, a star goes across the sky. Okay, wow. A meteor. And the first words out of my mouth was, that was quick. And then I said, could you do that again? And of course, nothing happened, But it's like, okay, I'm good. Obviously, I'm supposed to go get married. So I said, okay, I've asked a question before. I'm going to ask the question again. So I wrote down in the journal, why was I born? And a couple seconds later, I kind of hear inside my head an answer that said, well, you're here to know me and love me. And I'm like, well, that's not a message from outside. That's just me talking to me. So I wait a little bit more, and it says, well, you're here to serve. It's like, I know that, but that's still not, coming from outside. That's just me talking to me. And then the third thing I heard was, look at your name. I'm like, what? My skin started to crawl. Then I was like, what kind of answer is that? Okay, this is not me talking to me. I said, okay, well, my full name is George Ronald Reardon. And I know that George means farmer. And then it hit me. George also means earth worker. I said, the soil is the minds of the children. And the father is the one that plants the seeds in the soil and nourishes it and helps it to grow. And then I was like, okay, what does Ronald mean? And I had to, ask Mr. Google, what does Ronald mean? Turns out that Ronald means powerful counselor. I'm like, powerful counselor, earth worker. The name I was given at birth has got my mission, my purpose in it. And then some friends of mine, when I shared the story with them, they said, look at your last name. I'm like, it's Reardon. They said, rear. You rear children. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I said, okay, I'm good. So God can actually talk to you at Starbucks. And that's how I really got confirmation this is what I'm supposed to do.
Wow, that's a powerful story, and I've known you for a little while, and I've never heard that story, so I can see why I asked if I wanted to know the truth, because that's a very powerful message.
You can't make this kind of stuff up, okay?
No, exactly. So, was your dad a positive role model? What was he like as a father?
Well, I was actually raised by my aunt and uncle, my father's older sister. When I was about 3 years old, my father had got called up to the Navy. He'd been in World War II in the Navy, and he got called up for Korea. And so he's in a boat out in the Atlantic. My mom takes me with her and kind of leaves where they were in New Jersey, and she goes to her folks' place, and she tries to work while her folks watch me, and that's not working out too well. So then she goes down to Florida and does it like that. And so finally, she takes me back up to her mother-in-law, my father's mother, and says, I really can't keep Ronnie, because that was my nickname. Will you keep him? And then she was gone. Okay? And it was a habit of hers because she had done that in her first marriage. She had had a son, and then she just kind of left. Okay? So she did that with my dad. And so my grandmother realized that she was too old to raise a 3-year-old in the little bitty apartment that she was in. So she checks with my dad, who's on the boat, and the only thing that he could think of is, well, you need to just put Ronnie in an orphanage. And the reason that he had that solution was that's what happened to him and his brother and his older sister, was they were put in an orphanage when their father died, when they were young. And so my grandmother calls up her oldest daughter, my Aunt Betty, and says, will you keep Ronnie? And my aunt had her first and only daughter in February, and so I came to live with them forever in May. Now, how many women you know that just had a newborn that would agree to take their brother's son in? Okay.
That's brave.
Yeah, it's very brave. So anyway, I was raised by my aunt and uncle, and to answer your question, no, he was not a great father or father
So,
figure for me.
and so for somebody who didn't really have a positive male role model growing up, what was it like when you first became a dad? And did you kind of say to yourself, I'm going to be different? How did that all transpire? How did that go?
Well, when I found out that we're gonna that the, you know the mother came to me and says we're pregnant, not I'm pregnant, but we are pregnant. Okay,
It's a team. It's a team effort for
it's
sure.
a team effort. Yeah, and we've been trying for quite some time. Okay, and so I decided to do the exact opposite because understanding my story, um, parenting has evolved over the years. I mean, if you go back to the history, I mean, parenting was pretty horrific if you go back a couple of centuries. Okay, but it's gotten better and better. But my aunt and uncle were raised during the time when children should be seen and not heard, and that you don't really show physical love and you don't have verbal love. And so I grew up never hearing the words "I love you" and never being hugged or anything like that. And I was hungry for love. Okay, but so I decided that when my twin boys were born, I can remember making the decision, Mike. I said even as infants, every day they were going to hear "I love you," and every day they were physically going to feel my love, either through me rocking them, caressing them, rubbing their back. But every day was going to be both a loving touch and verbally they were going to know that they were being loved. And the other decision I made was I looked at all the skills, life skills that I developed very late in life. And I said, my sons are going to have those life skills very early in life. And so they were swimming at age 2, roller skating at age 5, etc. Ordering their own food at age 3.
Wow.
So because I looked at what skills do you need to be successful. And I said, my boys are going to have that really early so that I didn't care what they did for a living, but I wanted them to be able to do whatever they wanted to do because they were equipped. And that's part of what we teach in Fully Invested Dads is for the dads to have to number one, reflect on their childhood and how did they feel about it, good or bad, and make some decisions and put together a strategy of how they're going to be equipping their sons. Not that their sons or daughters are going to be a project, but they've got a plan. Okay.
Exactly. Well, I love what you're doing. So there's obviously a lot of different parenting advice out there and a lot of different books and courses. What makes Fully Invested Dads different than the other ones?
There's several things. You're right. There's tons. I mean, absolute truckloads of material out there on parenting, especially on their physical development, what happens every single month, okay, and also on their mental development. But as far as the emotional development, that's just emerging, okay, and that's really one of the places that we focus on and is distinctive. And plus, a lot of the parenting material that's out there, Mike, is for the mother. And so we're focusing on the father. And there's a growing movement in the United States especially of fathers getting more and more involved. It used to be, it just wasn't manly to be changing a diaper and things like that. But more and more they're realizing the impact that the father can have. And at the research that I've done, part of what we do that makes us distinctive is really focusing on the father's impact on the emotions of the child. Because while we like to think that it's our intellect and our willpower that really guides us through life, our energy source is our emotions. And they're realizing now, through the brain science and everything, that even in pregnancy, the child records emotions and memories. And while there's a part of our memory, Mike, that has to do with the putting a story together, and that really doesn't mature until about age 2, there's another memory that they call a body memory that is present even in the womb. Okay, and if the mother is stressed, those stress hormones go directly from the mother to the child. And if the mother is happy, then the child is kind of in a state of bliss. And so one of the things that we share with fathers is, happy mother, happy baby. And that they should make sure that the mothers have massages and get their
Wow,
nails.
every mother listening right now loves you for that comment, by the way.
That's right. But that the mother needs support, emotional support, physical support, mental support, understanding, and don't guys, don't put on your mixture fix it hat and give advice, just be present and supportive, okay, through that whole period. And when we talk about strategies, that they should have a strategy for what happens, not only on the day of birth, but when they come home from the hospital, because the mistake that I made, and the mother of my children made, is we tried to do everything as a team when the babies came home and they needed to be fed. Well, all of a sudden everybody is exhausted, and it's easy, Mike, to be a good parent if you're rested, but if you're sleep deprived, it starts getting kind of tough.
Yeah, it's hard to be good at anything when you're sleep deprived.
Yeah, and with my twin boys, their sleep schedule was an hour and a half shifted, so they weren't in sync, and so somebody was awake all the time, and
Wow.
so we learned that somebody's got to be sleeping while the other person takes care of it, and so we come up with a plan to do that. But part of what we teach the fathers is have that plan, and whether you like your mother-in-law or not, get her in there for a couple of weeks, because it's going to be child rearing is supposed to be a team sport. Instead of just the father and the mother, you need some other folks in there, to give you some relief.
Yep, so true, so true. And I can't even imagine what twins would be like. I mean, I have only one daughter. She's now almost 19. And that had its challenges for sure at times, but I can't even imagine raising two at the same time.
Yeah, it was a real challenge. And I do want to telegraph to everybody that, the boy's mother, and, starting in the second grade when we got divorced, the stepdad, they did a wonderful job too. It wasn't just me and my great plan and all like that. It was all of us, working together to raise some really fine boys that we're proud of.
Yeah, great. So give our listeners, I guess, some do's and don'ts. If you're a father, what are some of the do's and don'ts to create emotional security in your child?
Well, the key thing with the do's is connect. I mean, connect at a deep emotional level, and a father can do that several ways. Starting even before the baby's born. He starting in basically at about month 5 or whatever. The baby can actually hear not only the mother but the father, and so the father can be reading bedtime stories to the child even before it's born. But after it's born, basically, Mike, the child can tell by looking at your eyes and your dilation of your pupils whether you're really authentically smiling and caring. Okay.
Wow, so, that's really cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, but when the baby's first born, its field of vision is basically from the breast to the eye, so that when it is breastfeeding, it can actually see the mother at the same time. That's as far as its vision goes. So from a father's standpoint, if he's holding the child and either feeding it by the bottle or whatever, he needs to be within that same field of vision, and to be smiling, okay, and be an authentic smile, and to have a loving look, and to be talking very gently to the child, and to basically have skin-to-skin contact, because part of the way that our DNA is wired and everything is when there's skin-to-skin contact with the father and the child, it releases hormones in the father that makes him nurturing, and starts that bonding process.
Wow.
The other thing that it does when you have skin-to-skin contact right there, after the child is born, is it drops the testosterone, because the last thing, for the continuation of the species is for the father to be down at the bar drinking beer and chasing women. He needs to be at home nurturing. So both, just touching the child, starts gearing up the father to be nurtured.
Yeah, that's some great information. So what are some of the biggest surprises a fully invested dad can expect? What kind of things will happen if you're fully invested?
It took me a long time to figure this one out. But when my sons were 2 years old, I remember us walking in the backyard. It was winter time, and I'd bundled them up, and put on my heavy coat and all like that. And we're walking to the back corner of the chain link fence, and I'm sitting on a rock, and both of them kind of snuggle up to me. And it wasn't because they were cold; they were snuggling up to me because they loved me. And I don't know if it's just unique to me or if it's a challenge for all men, but I had pretty much suppressed my emotions from when I was a child as kind of a defense mechanism. And when they were snuggling up to me, I had this feeling, I was just like, it doesn't get any better than this. And it's because over those 2 years that love had really grown between us. And it got deeper and deeper. And I was like, I realized that I loved my sons at a deeper level than I loved their mother, which hopefully she's never going to see this video because I've never.
You'll be in really big trouble.
I'll be in big trouble. I've told my sons this, but so they know. And so I went through my life, and that love is still there, even though we're adults, okay, and they have their own children. And it wasn't until the last year, Mike, that I finally cracked the code and figured out why I had that deep of a love. And it's because I was studying about this part of our brain that's in charge of our survival. Some people call it the ego. And what it does is it's looking for saber-toothed tigers. It's looking for danger. Okay? And it causes us, especially as men, to keep our guard up. And I figured out that when I looked at my sons, Drew and Eric, the ego looked at them and said, "Oh, there's no danger here. Ron, you can let your shield down. You can be vulnerable because they're not going to hurt you." Okay? And so for the first time in my life, and I think in a lot of fathers' lives when they are really fully invested, they can put those shields down and they can be vulnerable. Because to really experience true intimacy, okay, with another person, you have to be not only authentic, you have to be vulnerable. And as men, being warriors, and protectors and all like that, we have a tendency to not drop that shield totally, even with our spouse, okay? Mainly because there's the fear in the men that if I open up and I share some, my fears or, intimate things about me, when we get into an argument, she's going to use it as a weapon against me.
And they never forget, by the way, do they?
And they never ever forget. And so with your children, that fear is not there, especially when they're little. Now you have to worry when they get to be teenagers, but when they're little, you can act. That's why I finally figured out. That's why I had such a deep love with my sons, is because I let myself be vulnerable, and I experienced true intimacy with them that I'd never experienced before. And so that's the surprise for a fully committed, fully invested dad, is they can experience intimacy at a level they've never experienced before.
Well, those are some amazing surprises, and definitely well worth being fully invested, which you should be doing anyway. So what are some of the modalities that you use to educate fathers that might want to learn some of your strategies and tactics?
Yeah, we're using both streaming video with audio and text, because you never know how the different dads are going to absorb the material. Like myself, I like to read. I'm an avid reader, so I always like to see transcripts of everything. Okay, and if a transcript's not provided, I create one. Okay, it's like listening to a previous interview that you did. I took 3 pages of notes, because it's one thing to watch and hear it. It's another to have it written out, and then after I handwrite it, I'll sit there and type it up. And after I type it up, I'll print it and I'll mark it in yellow what I think is really good. So we provide both text, and we do audio and do video, and we have in the plans to do a live event.
Yeah, that's a great way to learn, though, the way you're doing it with writing it and then typing it and printing it and highlighting it, because then it really sinks in. A lot of people take notes and they never look at those notes again.
Yeah, and I figure if you pay good money to go to an event or to listen, to watch a streaming video or whatever, you ought to get your money's worth. You ought to really have the lesson infused into your being. And believe it or not, an additional technique that I use that I learned from Brian Tracy is to sing the notes, because music is in a different part of the brain. And if you actually sing the information that you want, it imprints it even deeper so that you remember it. It's similar to how we learned the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I mean, that's on purpose that it was a song.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. I've never actually, I do like Brian Tracy. I've never heard that strategy before, so that's great.
Yeah, he has a program called Accelerated Learning, and I got that from there. I'm like, that's good stuff.
That is really good stuff. So I know you mentioned a few different people. Who are some of the biggest influences, or what are some of the books that have really been a big influence on you as an entrepreneur?
I think from a book standpoint, and this is a difficult question, Mike, because I'm surrounded here by hundreds of books, because I read a lot, okay, and I connect the dots that's in there. But if I had to just narrow it down to one particular book, that it would have to be the Bible, especially the Old Testament, because there's stories in there that are timeless, and that I've used a lot. Okay, I mean, there's one about Gideon and the 300, and there's the takeaway on that one is just a small group of people can accomplish a bunch. Okay, especially if they are
very true.
A small group of committed people. Okay, but I guess the other book that would be right behind the Bible is one by a child psychologist out in Australia called Heart to Heart Parenting. It really goes into great depth about the importance of early emotional connection with the child. You might not know it, but the stress point for a child is set at 6 months. How they're going to respond to stress as an adult is set at 6 months. And if the father and the mother do things right, then they can tolerate stress real well and respond to it. But if they don't, then they might just totally freeze up later when they're adult. And as far as the people that are the most influenced to me, number one in that would be my wife Hilda, because she saw things.
You just saved yourself from your previous comments, so now you're in the good books again.
but yeah, Hilda has always encouraged me, and she saw things in me that I never saw. She's the one that encouraged me to go get my MBA, and it was an executive MBA, and I was the oldest guy in the class. And I thought maybe my brain had turned to peanut butter, but it turns out that I could still absorb material. I always like to sit on the front row, so I was always front and center in the class. But Mike, I have this tendency, if I sit too long and I'm not talking or active or whatever, I go to sleep. And so I slept through
most. You go over well with the professors when you do that, by the way.
I know. I slept through most of my MBA. In fact, my classmates, when we graduated, gave me the book "Grow Rich While You Sleep" as a party gift. Because they could all see me just sitting there, just nodding away in class.
Wow, I can relate, because I got my degree and I don't remember a whole lot. I learned how to party really well, and I somehow managed to get a degree through all that. But I slept a lot of the time too, so I know all about that.
Yeah, but yeah, Hilda would be number one. She the one that encouraged me and saw things that I could do that I didn't think I could. And of course, my Aunt Betty, who raised me, my father's older sister. I came to the conclusion, Mike, that if I had not been raised by my Aunt Betty, I would either be dead or in jail.
Wow, that's very powerful. Yeah. Everything happens for a reason, though, and obviously you turned out very well. Now you're just contributing amazing things to this world and all the kids of this world.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so we have to wrap things up here pretty soon, but if you could have one message to send to our listeners, what would that message be?
Well, especially to the fathers, who's my target, is, fathers, you matter. What you're doing, especially at an emotional level, is really imprinting and guiding that child, for the rest of their life. Because you basically have cause, and you have effect, you have direction, and you have destination. And so what the father does with the child, from as far as their emotions and their psychology, as Brendan says that in his peak performance, high performance academy, if you don't get your psychology right, the rest of it really doesn't matter. What you're eating, what you're exercising, the strategies. You've got to get those emotions and your psychology on target, because you either have baggage and breaks from your beliefs that are triggered by the emotions, or you have balloons and boosters. One of the two. And it's a lot better to be lifted by the balloons and having the rocket boosters pushing you forward.
Yeah, great words of wisdom. So how does somebody, if they want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Yeah, they can do Ron at fullyinvesteddads.com, and of course, Fully Invested Dads would be FULLYINVESTEDDADS.com. That's the best way. Ron at fullyinvesteddads.com.
Perfect. Before we go, do you know somebody named Kalani Ballet by any chance?
No, I do not.
He's a good friend of mine. He lives in Southern California. He wrote a book called Superhero Dads, and I'm going to connect the two of you because I think you could either be affiliates for each other or you could be collaborating. I'm not sure, but I'll leave that to you two guys. But he's a great dad. He's raising kids by himself and just a phenomenal person. So I think you guys need to meet. So I'll hook that up for you.
Definitely, I would love that. That would be super.
Yeah, so it was a pleasure having you here, Ron. And I love what you're doing, and I congratulate you and wish you all the best. And I know I'm going to see you somewhere soon because we always seem to meet up. But thanks so much for taking your time to be here today.
It's been great, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks again, Ron, and thank you, the viewers, for tuning in. I hope you found some value in this, and I look forward to having you watch our next episode. Thanks again for tuning in.